Hello, everyone, and welcome to Planning for Skills Block Rotations. Here is our agenda for the day, with the main goal being that you leave the session feeling empowered and excited to make meaningful instructional decisions for your students so that they can make sufficient growth and accomplish fluency and accuracy in word recognition skills. We will start by very briefly reviewing the why behind the skills block rotations, taking a deep dive into the skills block benchmark assessments and rubrics required for each grade level, and then using that data to assign microphases and groupings of students, how to effectively plan for and prioritize student learning within the skills block rotations, and we will end with practicing and planning activities together. So the why. Why are the rotations so important to us as K2 teachers? If you are not familiar with this infographic, it is Hollis Scarborough's reading rope, sometimes referred to as the reading rope. Scarborough developed it in 2001 to show the connection between early language and later reading abilities, and unfortunately, sometimes reading disabilities. It explains how essential language skills work together to develop skilled reading. Although the original goal of this infographic was to call attention to all the skills needed for early literacy as a way to identify more children at risk for reading difficulty, the graphic has become a key part of the research in the science of reading, helping teachers support students in developing a strong, stable base for word recognition and language comprehension. Scarborough's rope asserts that both language comprehension and word recognition are necessary for skilled reading. She describes the importance of automatic word recognition skills, or phonological awareness, decoding, and sight recognition of words, to ensure that the reader exerts minimal effort to decode text, saving important cognitive energy for comprehension. The rope also serves as a roadmap to help identify students' reading difficulties. Each strand of the reading rope intersects and weaves together, making skilled reading. Weakness in one strand can cause the rope to fray, causing a loss of essential strength in word recognition or language comprehension. During the K2 skills block rotations, we are focused on the bottom three strands of the rope, or word recognition. This includes phonemic awareness, or the ability to recognize and manipulate spoken parts of sentences and words. Examples include identifying words that rhyme, recognizing alliteration, segmenting sentences into words, and identifying syllables in words. Phonemic awareness also includes phonological awareness, the ability to notice, think about, and work with individual sounds, or phonemes, in spoken words. Word recognition also includes decoding, or translating written words into speech, and sight recognition of words. Again, the reason why we need to prioritize skills block instruction is because without being accurate and fluent with these skills, students will never become a skilled reader. The idea is to become so fluent or automatic in word recognition skills that will allow the cognitive lift of reading to focus on comprehension. As you are already aware, EL Skills Block is based upon the research of Dr. Linnea Airey, one of the nation's foremost experts on how the brain maps sounds and letters. Here you can see Airey's 4 phases of reading development. The phases consist of a predictable developmental continuum that provides insight into how reading and spelling develop in young readers. Airey's phases progress from pre-alphabetic, where students lack letter sound knowledge, up to consolidated phoneme-grapheme correspondences in larger units that can be used to read multisyllabic words. In addition to Dr. Airey's widely recognized 4 phases of reading development, the curriculum writers of EL education worked with Dr. Airey to develop microphases, which are a further breakdown of the phases into early, middle, and late. This precision allows us to have more detailed and systematic progression of reading and spelling behavior. Decades of research has proven that systematic instruction of letter sound correspondences and decoding strategies, and the application of these skills in reading and writing activities, is the most effective method for improving literacy skills for children. Furthermore, multisensory instructional approaches in which all learning pathways of the brain, meaning visual, auditory, and kinesthetic or tactile, are simultaneously working together enhance memory and learning. This multisensory language instruction requires that the organization of material follow the logical order of our language. The sequence must begin with the easiest and most basic elements and progress methodically to more difficult material. In other words, we need to use our skills block benchmark assessments to pinpoint exactly where our students are in these phases of reading and spelling development to provide instruction and repeated practice for accuracy and fluency. Moving on to looking at our benchmark assessments. Here are the required skills block benchmark assessments per grade level. You can see that in the middle of the year, kindergarten students are doing letter names, letter sounds, and spelling. First and second grade is doing spelling and decoding. Starting with the letter names and sounds benchmark, on the bottom here you will see the materials required for this assessment, the 2 student-facing sheets, and a scoring sheet for each student. I recommend using the same scoring sheets as the fall and only assessing names and sounds that were unknown in the fall. If a child already knew them in the fall, a benchmark does not need to be given at all. It's important to note that although we already completed STAR assessments in December, the only true data we get from the letter name and sound CBMs are if a student is in a fluent and accurate range or not. We will not know exactly the letter names and sounds a child knows because we will only know what a child was exposed to on a given STAR probe. Therefore, it is still important to give the skills block letter names and sounds benchmark assessments so we can know exactly which letters and sounds the student needs further practice with. Remember, our goal is to be as explicit and systematic as possible. It's also important to note that phase theory does not identify a specific number of letters or sounds a child should be able to name in order to move from one phase to the next. As a result, the microphase correlation for this assessment is mostly meant as a guide for grouping and choosing appropriate materials for differentiated small group instruction. That is why you do not see a specific number related to each of these microphases for letter names and sounds. Next, we will look at the spelling benchmarks. The arrows on this slide indicate the list you should start with, depending on which grade level you teach. All spelling assessments use the same rubric as shown on this slide. It's important to note with this assessment that if a child is unable to spell at least 5 words from the list, you should drop back to the previous list and give that assessment instead. Similarly, if a student spells all 11 or 12 words correctly, I would then want to give a spelling assessment using the next highest list. Again, remember, the whole purpose of this is for us to determine a student's most foundational skill needed as an entry point for instruction. For example, if I am a first grade teacher, I will give all students the full alphabetic spelling list. If a child only gets 3 correct, I will then administer the partial alphabetic spelling list. If the child has less than 5 correct again, I will administer the letter names and sounds assessment to determine their most foundational skill needed. Similarly, if I am a kindergarten teacher, I will give all students the partial alphabetic spelling list. If a student gets 11 or 12 correct, I'll then give the full alphabetic spelling list, and so on, until I find that entry point for instruction. With decoding, remember, kindergarten does not do this assessment unless you are testing up to determine an appropriate microphase. Unlike the spelling assessment, each phase decoding assessment has its own corresponding rubric. Just like the spelling assessment, If a student decodes 5 or less words from a given list, I will drop back to the previous list to determine an appropriate microphase. Again, the whole purpose of this is for us to determine a student's most foundational skill needed as an entry point for instruction. Now, what happens if I give my spelling and decoding assessments, and my spelling assessment says my student should start at one microphase, and my decoding assessment says I should start at another? You should always choose the lower of the two. In most cases, this will be the spelling, because in most cases, students can read words before they can spell them. I want to start at the lowest of the two because that is the most foundational weakness for that child, and I want to provide instruction at that place. While this is not required, many teachers have found this group planner or something similar to be useful for grouping students by microphase. It provides a good visual for me to figure out who should be grouped together. On this slide, you'll see a sample class that I made up after scoring the benchmark assessments. I knew that I wanted to have 5 groups. The first thing I wanted to do was prioritize putting kids into groups that are in a similar microphase. So you see I have 2 groups in that middle partial alphabetic. My other 3 groups I had to spread out across microphases in order to get 5 groups. Now that I've completed my benchmark assessments and grouped my students accordingly, I'm ready to start planning activities for the skills block rotations. Here is a sample rotation schedule. Again, this is not required, but something to think about. Ideally, I want to meet with my below-level groups each day. On the example you see here, I have 2 groups that are below level, 2 on level, and 1 above level. Again, this is not a definitive way for you to plan activities for each group, but just an idea to get you started, or you could use this exact one. Notice how each group, all students are doing AIR 5 times a week. My 2 below-level groups are also with me, the teacher, 5 times a week. That only leaves 5 rotations. So I need to decide, what do I want my students to do with that time? I prioritized word work and fluency, where they will do each of those twice, and writing once. For my 2 groups that are on level, they're still doing AIR 5 times a week, every day, but now they're with me, the teacher, only twice, leaving 8 rotations. For them, I prioritize fluency in writing 3 times a week and word work twice. My last group, again, has AIR 5 times a week, but now they're with me, the teacher, only once a week, word work twice, fluency twice, and I prioritized writing for them as enrichment. Using the numbers from the last slide, I simply played around with the slots available for each rotation to come up with this sample weekly schedule of when groups are doing which activities. Again, this is not a requirement, but something to think about. This would be something that is for me as teacher facing. I would not necessarily share this with students because it can be a lot to take in. Instead, on this slide, you will see 2 examples from classrooms in our own district. On the first picture at the bottom, this teacher presents their class with a slide where they can only see 1 rotation at a time. In between rotations, the teacher gets up and clicks next, and then the students can see what they're doing for the second time and the third time. The picture on the right, this teacher has decided to show all 3 rotations at the same time so the students know what's coming up next. This is a preference. You could also use a pocket chart. Just some ideas of things to think about. You also must think about how are you going to organize the student materials. I've seen a couple different things work as I've been in schools throughout the district. Some teachers choose to have a bin, 5 separate bins, okay? One for word work, one for writing, one for air, one for fluency. And then within each of those bins, a folder for each group. So if I'm in fluency the first time and I'm in group 3, I would go to the fluency bin and look for the group 3 folder and pull out the activity that's in there. Other teachers have decided to do it the reverse way. Instead of having a bin for each type of activity, they have a bin for each group. And then within that group's bin is a folder for writing, for word work, for fluency, and so on. Again, teacher preference, but things to think about. I would be remiss in not mentioning that it's important for you to teach these routines of how you want your students to get their materials for the rotations. Without explicitly teaching these routines, you could run into some trouble. Again, this is not a requirement, but based on feedback from teachers throughout the district, one concern is the organization of materials. So I have this binder system as an option for organizing all the materials you as a teacher could possibly need. Here is my binder, and here is my table of contents. You can find a copy of this on the note catcher that is associated with this PD. Now it's time to plan student activities. I will model planning for a group, and then we're going to do some practicing. For each group, I want to plan for the most basic entry point for the lowest student in the group. So for example, using group 1 from my sample class, which is in the pre-alphabetic microphase, I need to figure out where within the microphase I should start. I don't necessarily want to start with cycle 1 because the group may already know those letters. I use the planner that you see at the bottom of the screen to figure out exactly where I need to start. And if you notice, the students in group 1, they all already knew A and T. They also knew H and P from cycle 2. But when I get to cycle 3, N and C, I notice that I have some openings here. This is where I want to start my instruction. So where am I going to get my activities? I want to look at kindergarten, module 1, cycle 3. Everything this group of students will do throughout the week in all rotations will be in relation to the letters N and C. If the group is in word work, they are practicing the letters N and C. If the group is in writing practice, they're working on letter formation of the letters N and C. If the group is with the teacher, they're using the poem associated with the letters N and C. If the group is in reading fluency, they are working with the letters N and C. If the group is in air, they're searching for the letters N and C. See a pattern here? The idea is that the students will get so much repeated practice of the letters N and C throughout the week that I can check those letters off and move on to the next most foundational skill, or in this case, letter needed. But where do I get the activities? Again, Based upon teacher and leader feedback, we understand that it can be overwhelming for some teachers to plan differentiated activities for 5 different groups of students each day. Therefore, we have created a skills block activity planner to hopefully streamline this process for you. The skills block activity planner can be used to pinpoint exactly what types of activities I should do for those students. So, remember my N and C group. I'm going to go over here to kindergarten, module 1, cycle 3, N and C. This first row here is work with the teacher. They are going to be reading the poem, My Cat Noodles. And in the work with teacher column, the lesson narrative for My Cat Noodles is linked for you. No need to go searching in the ILC. When my students get to AIR, which is the next row, they're going to be using the student copy of My Cat Noodles, linked for you right here, to search for the letters N and C. You could also have students use any book from your classroom library, and every time they see a capital or lowercase n or c, to write it on their whiteboard and practice making the sounds. Next, I have word work. There are many different options for word work. You do not need to prep all of these. Remember, this group in particular that I'm talking about is only going to word work twice this week. So I'm going to find 2 word work activities that I would like my students to complete. For example, there are 3 different versions of an initial sound sort. You may choose to do this one. There are 2 others. Maybe this group is semi-advanced and I want to do an initial and final sound sort. Again, there are 2 different versions for you to choose from. One of the items on here, roll and write, pull this up real quick. I want to show you how, oops, this is the wrong week. Oh, no, it's not. Sorry about that. I want to show you how not only do I have my N and C from this week and their new high frequency word, the, I also have a review high frequency word. This is something that can either be printed out as a worksheet, or you can print it on cardstock and laminate, and the kids could use whiteboard markers on it, and therefore you have it again for next year or for other groups of students. Similarly, the roll and cover that I have here for fluency not only has the N and C in the new high frequency word the, but I've also included some of their other letters as review as well as review high frequency words. During writing, my students are working on letter formation of N and C. So again, everything that you could possibly need for those rotations is right here for you. I do want to point out before I go back that along the bottom here, you will see the different microphases. This skills block organizer can be used for all K2. It goes all the way up to late consolidated. Again, you will see multiple options for word work and for fluency. When you get to writing, you will see the prompts associated with that microphase. And within the prompts, I gave you a word bank for students based on the cycle words. And I also included some high frequency words. This can be found easily by going to OCI's page, clicking on ELA, and you can find it in multiple places. You can find it here in this one-stop doc. You can also find it here where it says ELA updated resources for EL. There you go. Okay. So there's different places where you can find that information. Okay. So let's test your knowledge. Using the activity planner, I want you to take a minute to determine which cycle you will use to plan rotations for group 2. So you see my group 2 where my arrow is pointing. Where do you think I should start with them? If you said kindergarten, module 3, cycle 12, or digraphs SH, CH, and TH, you are correct, because that is where I have my first gap. Okay, just want to go back and pull up this planner real quick one more time because I forgot to show you that down here at the bottom underneath the activities is also a space where you can use the little check marks to check what do I actually need to provide instruction in. So you as a teacher can take this, make a copy of it for yourself, and put in your own student names and check off the skills that your students know based on their benchmark assessments. Okay, so that is it for today. I hope that you learned a lot about rotations and what you should be doing during that time. We thank you for joining us. If you ever have any questions or need support, please email us at ela@philasd.org.